Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you are listening to this right now, you're probably looking around at the modern world and feeling, I don't know, a bit anxious.
Right. You're watching the systems.
Yeah, exactly. You're watching our economies, our political institutions, the social contracts, and feeling this increasing sense of fragility. Like you read the news and see systems that look massive.
Or huge, supposedly permanent systems.
Yeah, but they constantly feel like they're just one minor shock away from a total collapse. I mean, we have this deep, almost intuitive anxiety that the math of our society just isn't adding up anymore.
Well, and that anxiety is entirely justified. I mean, what you are sensing is a fundamental violation of structural mechanics.
Which brings us to the absolute core of our mission today. We have a genuinely fascinating stack of notes here from Tolu Islam Lecture 2 out of 13, and we're specifically analyzing Surah Al-Anbiya, verses 10 through 20.
This is a heavy section.
It really is. And our goal here is to use this text to completely strip away that magical, superstitious lens that humanity usually uses to view history. We want to replace it with a ruthless mathematical reality.
Because that traditional way of reading ancient texts, it is a massive hindrance. I mean, when most people read a historical scripture about a city falling or a civilization collapsing, they instantly default to this fantasy novel framework.
Well, for sure. The cinematic version.
Right, exactly. The clouds part, an angry deity points a finger, and a literal lightning bolt strikes the wicked city.
Yeah.
And then it's just swallowed by hellfire while an invisible choir chants in the background. It's highly cinematic.
It's a literal movie scene. It's dramatic, it's magical, and I think most importantly, it feels entirely disconnected from the physical laws of the world we actually live in.
Which is very comforting if you think about it.
It is, because if historical downfalls are just, magical events like divine temper tantrums, then they don't apply to our modern supply chains. They don't apply to our monetary policy or our social hierarchies.
Yeah, it creates a buffer. It lets us say, well, we have GDP, we have algorithms, we have modern statecraft, so we are immune to the fairy tales of the past.
Right.
But when you step into the framework of social physics, which is exactly what this source material demands, that buffer just shatters. We are no longer looking at a theatrical play here.
So let's actually anchor that in the text itself, because in the notes breaking down verse 10, there is this specific phrase, fihi di crucum.
Yes, fihi di crucum.
And the text frames this not as some collection of ancient spells, but literally as a blueprint for human elevation. And then verse 16 delivers what I can only describe as an absolute reality check regarding the nature of the cosmos.
It really does. The text explicitly states that the cosmos was not created by entities who are Laban.
Okay, so if we break down the root of Laban, it means playing around, right?
Yeah.
Like engaging in an idle game.
Yeah, more specifically, it means building a sandbox for cosmic entertainment, like engaging in a theatrical production where the rules are just arbitrary.
So no magic wands.
Exactly. What this verse establishes as its baseline axiom is that the universe is not a playground. It is an unyielding, high-stakes infrastructure of absolute truth. I mean, it is a highly dense, zero-tolerance ecosystem.
Meaning it operates on structural laws that are just as strict and just as unforgiving as gravity or thermodynamics.
Precisely.
And this ecosystem has an automatic, built-in immune response against systemic corruption. So we aren't talking about a deity micromanaging human affairs with a thunderbolt.
No, not at all.
We're talking about a universe that aggressively mathematically purges structural exploitation.
Which, forces us to confront a very uncomfortable diagnostic landscape, because if the universe operates on strict physical laws of cause and effect where exploitation mathematically guarantees a systemic purge, why do human beings constantly try to bypass those laws?
Right. How do we convince ourselves that we can somehow outsmart gravity? Well, to answer that, the source material points to a really specific societal distraction. It talks about the illusion of what it calls the unconscious mind, or this escape into pure subjectivity. But I want to throw a wrench into this right away.
Okay.
Because the text brings up a very sharp critique of poets, soothsayers, and fortune tellers. It paints this picture of ancient societies relying on seers or, people sitting by the road with parrots picking tarot cards, essentially outsourcing their reality to mystical muses.
Right, which is the ultimate abdication of physical responsibility. It's this belief that destiny is an external script that you just wait to have read to you. It's completely untethered from your own kinetic actions.
Hold on, let me push back hard on this. Are we saying the text is just fundamentally anti-art? Like anti-poetry?
No, I wouldn't.
Because Yuval Noah Harari literally argues in Sapiens that shared myths, which are essentially fictional narratives or structural fluff, are the exact glue that allowed human beings to cooperate in large numbers and build civilization.
That's a fair point.
So isn't poetry, in that sense, the very foundation of society? Are we supposed to just ban metaphors and read structural engineering textbooks all day?
Okay, that is a critical distinction to make. It is not an attack on the aesthetic value of art. What it is a profound critique of a specific underlying epistemology.
Meaning how we actually know what is real.
Yes. Harari is talking about narratives that coordinate kinetic human action to build physical infrastructure and laws. What this source text is critiquing is escapism masquerading as reality. It uses poetry in this historical context as a metaphor. It's talking about a society that builds its entire worldview on subjective emotions, unproven assertions, and emotional highs, all while completely ignoring the physical rot of their actual systems.
So it's the difference between a myth that gets 1,000 people to build an aqueduct and a myth that tells 1,000 starving people they don't need food because the stars are aligned in their favor.
That captures the physics of it perfectly. In fact, the text references a prominent Western scholar, likely pointing towards someone like Matthew Arnold, who noted, and this is a great quote, "The antithesis of poetry is not prose, but science."
The antithesis of poetry is not prose, but science. Okay, wow.
Right.
So if science is objective, verifiable reality, the hard boundaries of what is actually happening in the physical world, then poetry, in this specific negative context, is a reality built purely on emotion.
Untethered to evidence.
Yeah.
Exactly. When a society's foreign policy or its economic distribution or its justice system is based on fairy tales or unchecked assertions of supremacy or even just the emotional high of a charismatic leader's rhetoric.
Rather than the hard laws of cause and effect.
Yeah. When that happens, that society is actively detaching from the universe.
And the source material uses a very specific term for what happens to a population living in that state. It says these escapist pursuits lead directly to a loss of quo audemal, the power of action.
Kinetic momentum. I mean, when you are intoxicated by the emotional resonance of an unproven narrative, you just stop doing the actual physical work required to maintain a civilization.
You abandon what the text calls amal isala.
Right. Constructive, reality-aligned action.
I think the best way to visualize this in a modern context is imagine a hyper-realistic virtual reality headset.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Imagine an entire society addicted to this VR game. Inside the game, their avatars are billionaires. They are flying, they are invincible, their empires are expanding, and they are getting a massive, constant drip of dopamine and psychological validation. It feels incredibly real.
But it is a completely closed loop of subjective input.
Exactly. And meanwhile, in the objective physical world, their actual house is on fire. The wiring is faulty, the walls are catching, the smoke is filling the room. But because their subjective VR experience tells them they're sitting on a pristine beach, they take absolutely no constructive action, no amali sali to put out the flames.
They just sit on the couch and burn.
They just burn.
The society you are describing is intellectually bankrupt. It has absolutely no forward kinetic energy. It is coasting on an illusion. And, this brings us to the core mechanical question of the text.
Which is?
When a society lives entirely inside that VR headset, engaging in extractive behavior and ignoring the objective laws of social physics, what is the actual mechanism of their failure?
Oh, right. Because if we are fully dropping the magical lens, we can't just say, God threw a fireball through the roof of the burning house.
Exactly. We need the mechanics.
So how does the collapse physically manifest? Is it just a sudden overnight curse?
Far from it. The source text uses brilliant, grounded physical and medical analogies to explain the mechanics of this collapse. Destruction in the universe is cumulative.
Cumulative.
Yeah, it uses the analogy of a disease. A healthy body doesn't just wake up one morning completely overcome by a systemic failure. It is a slow, methodical breakdown of cellular rules.
Like a gradual loss of internal regulation.
Precisely. And the text also provides a structural engineering analogy. Think of a massive, heavy, load-bearing wooden roof beam in a grand palace.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
That beam does not spontaneously collapse out of nowhere. The text mentions the noon.
Oh, the termite.
The termite, the slow termite that eats away at the internal structure of the wood, completely invisible from the outside, for years, maybe decades.
Wow. So the operative concept here is darja badarja.
Yes, which translates to a step-by-step gradual accumulation of ruin. I mean, the elites of these societies build their grand estates, they construct their economic models, they close all the doors to danger, they hire guards, they build high walls around their gated communities.
And they look at the physical exterior of their society, they look at their stock market indexes, their GDP, their military parades, and they say, look at our strengths, we are untouchable.
But they are completely unaware of the darja badarja structural rot happening right beneath them.
The termites have been hollowing out the beam for an entire generation.
Exactly. Now let's look at how the source text describes the inevitable result of that rot. Because traditional translations of these verses can really flatten the physics into simple theology.
Right.
If we look at the raw vocabulary of verse 11, the word used for the society's end is kazamna. Traditional translations usually just read, we destroyed.
Which puts us right back in the fantasy novel, right?
Yeah.
A deity pushing a big red destroy button.
Yeah.
But we're doing a linguistic deep dive here. So if we trace the mechanical morphological root of kasama in classical Arabic, what are we actually looking at?
Well, kasama does not mean a magical explosion. It means to structurally fracture. It is the specific action of snapping something that has become dangerously brittle.
Okay, let's pause and build on that. To snap something brittle implies that the object has completely lost its flexibility. It has lost its elasticity.
Yes.
If we apply the physics of elasticity to a society, what does that look like? Think about a green branch on a living tree. You apply pressure to it, say a strong wind, and it bends.
It absorbs the force.
Right, it bows deeply, but it absorbs the kinetic energy, and when the wind passes, it snaps back into its original shape. That is societal elasticity.
And that elasticity requires a healthy internal structure. It requires an equitable distribution of resources, a functioning justice system, a populace that has enough surplus energy to actually absorb a shock.
Now, think about a dead, dried-out branch. The internal moisture is gone, the cellular structure is hollowed out, you put even a fraction of that same wind pressure on it, and it doesn't bend.
It violently, catastrophically fractures. Kasama.
Exactly. And the text pairs this exact mechanism with a diagnostic label for the society, calling it zalima. Now, usually that gets translated as wicked or wrongdoing, but what does it mean in the context of systemic elasticity?
In a strict socioeconomic context, zalima means extractive, asymmetric, and exploitative. It denotes a profound imbalance of forces.
So it's about hoarding.
Yes. When a society's economic and political models become fundamentally exploitative, when the wealth, the resources, and the protections are aggressively hoarded at the very top, and the human capital at the bottom is continuously drained without ever being replenished, that society physically loses its elasticity. It becomes rigid.
Let's apply this to a real-world modern equivalent so we can really see the physics in action. Let's look at the 2008 financial crash.
Oh, perfect example.
Because that wasn't a divine curse, right? It was pure kasama. You had a financial system that became incredibly zalima. It was highly extractive, building massive towers of wealth on top of subprime mortgages, essentially hollowing out the foundation of the middle class, while the elites at the top felt totally secure in their gated economic communities.
They were wearing the VR headsets.
Yes.
Their subjective economic models, the poetry of their risk assessment algorithms told them they were invincible.
Right. And because the system was so asymmetric, it lost all its elasticity. It could no longer absorb shocks. I mean, in a healthy, elastic economy, a minor housing dip in one sector might cause a bend, but the system snaps back.
But because the entire structure was hollowed out by the termites of predatory lending and derivatives, it was brittle.
So when the pressure was applied, it didn't bend. It fractured catastrophically.
The law of requital, the built-in immune response of the universe, it doesn't have to summon a mystical storm. The society simply snaps under the mathematical weight of its own economic and social contradictions.
The termite finishes its work.
Exactly. The core is completely hollowed out, the load at the top remains massive, and the beam simply gives way. That is the objective certainty of Kasama.
So if the collapse is an unavoidable mathematical certainty built into the fabric of an extractive system, how do the architects of that system react when the math finally catches up to them? We see their exact psychological reaction detailed in verses 12 and 13.
Right. This is the moment of the crash. The term used is basana. It is the precise moment the beam snaps, the moment the elites rip off the VR headset and see the flames.
And what is their immediate instinct? Do they try to fix the structural rot?
No, it's way too late for that.
The text says they run, they panic, They attempt to flee the consequences of the physics they spent their entire lives ignoring, trying to retreat back to their hoarded wealth.
And the text engages in a profound, almost surgical psychological mockery here. I mean, the cosmos actively taunts them in verse 13. It basically says, do not run, go back to your unchecked extravagances, go back to your secure, luxurious, gated communities so that you can be questioned.
So that you can be questioned. That is such a fascinating phrase. It's not go back to your houses so I can drop a meteor on you. It's go back so you can be audited.
It is an interrogation by reality. And it exposes the ultimate intellectual bankruptcy of the elite class. For decades, or perhaps centuries, they operated under the delusion that their unproven assertions of supremacy, their structural fluff, could somehow bypass the foundational laws of physics.
They honestly believed they had outsmarted gravity.
They did. But the universe is a closed ledger. Reality is stepping in and demanding an audit.
Imagine a corporation that has been artificially inflating its stock price for 50 years by writing fake numbers in the ledger, withdrawing capital, without ever producing anything of physical value. When the cosmic auditor arrives, you can't show them a subjective feeling. You can't show them the VR headset.
No, the auditor asks for objective data.
And they have none. But the books must balance.
And the realization that your entire existence, your entire empire is backed by absolutely nothing is a terror that is hard to quantify. But the text doesn't stop at the psychological terror. It actually moves forward to describe the kinetic physics of how the universe clears out this corruption.
Which brings us to verse 18. And honestly, this might be the most intense analytical part of the entire lecture notes.
I agree.
The verse is, Nakifu bilhaki al-albayo. Now again, if you read a standard traditional translation, it sounds like a magical spellcast from Mount Olympus. We hurl the truth against falsehood.
Right, it evokes Zeus throwing a thunderbolt at a demon.
Exactly. But if we apply our macrohistory social physics lens, we have to look at the linguistic mechanics.
And the vocabulary here is intensely physical. The first word is Kathafa. In classical Arabic, this is not a gentle toss. It does not mean to simply hurl something in a metaphorical sense.
What does it mean?
Kathafa describes a high-velocity kinetic launch. Think of a ballistic missile or a railgun firing a dense, superheated projectile at maximum velocity.
Okay, so we have established a kinetic strike. Now, what is the projectile being fired? Because the text says it is hawk.
Yes, and hawk is traditionally translated merely as truth. But in the context of this social physics framework, hawk represents dense, objective, undeniable physical reality.
It's the math.
It is the math. It is the unyielding foundational laws of the universe. It is thermodynamics. It is cause and effect. It is the mathematical certainty that actions have equal and opposite reactions. Hack has infinite density.
So if hack is the dense projectile of physical reality, what is it targeting? By deduction, if it is targeting falsehood or Baal, it has to be targeting the illusion.
Let's expand on Baal. In this vocabulary, Baal is the structural fluff. It is the economic bubble built entirely on debt and speculation.
It is a political regime sustained purely by propaganda and state-sponsored myths.
Exactly. It is the subjective illusion that a society can continuously exploit its working class without eventually facing a collapse in production.
It's the VR game.
It is the VR game. And think about the physical properties of a bubble. It has volume, it looks massive, it takes up a huge amount of space in the society, dominating the culture and the economy. But it has absolutely no density. It is hollow.
So the mechanics of the verse describe a high-velocity kinetic launch of infinite density, which is hack, colliding head-on with an inflated, hollow bubble of structural fluff, Baal. What happens at the point of impact?
Well, the verse uses the term yadmaguhu.
Yadmaguhu.
Yes, and this is a surgical, devastating word. It means to strike and completely smash the brain. In our modern vernacular, it means it destroys the core processing unit of the falsehood.
Oh, wow.
It shatters the very ideological center, the central algorithm, that was keeping the illusion functioning in the first place.
And when the dense reality hits that core processor, the text says the bubble experiences Zaheq.
Yes, and Zaheq is the outcome of the collision. It does not mean the bubble pops and leaves a messy pile of rubber on the floor. Zaheq means a complete, immediate, and violent evaporation into nothingness. The illusion ceases to exist the millisecond it comes into contact with objective physics.
Let's ground this again. Think about the collapse of a massive corporate fraud, like Enron.
Oh, classic Bob.
Exactly. For years, Enron was Bell. It was this massive economic bubble, looking like one of the most powerful companies on Earth. but it was structural fluff. It was built on accounting tricks and unproven assertions. It had volume, but no density.
Right.
Then, the kinetic strike of Zaheq, the objective reality of their actual cash flow and massive hidden debts, collided with the core processing unit of their accounting department.
And what happened to the billions of dollars of perceived wealth? It didn't just change hands. It experienced Zaheq. It evaporated.
It literally ceased to exist because in physical reality, it was never actually there. The math asserted itself, and the illusion was instantly erased.
The precision of that physics is staggering, but it leads to an even deeper physical question, which is because once that bubble is smashed, once the illusion evaporates, what is left of the society itself? The people, the infrastructure. This brings us directly into the thermodynamics of macro history.
Which is verse 15. It describes the final physical state of these exploitative, brittle societies after the audit is complete. And the phrase used is Ayat kamidin.
Yes, Ayat kamidin.
I want to spend some time here because applying thermodynamics to human history is the kind of paradigm shift this deep dive is all about. What is the literal translation of those terms?
Well, Ayat refers to harvested stubble.
Like in a cornfield after harvest.
Exactly. It is the dry, dead, useless stalks left behind in a field after the living, nutritious crop has been completely stripped away and consumed. And kamid refers to an extinguished fire.
Not a fire that was put out with water, though, right?
No, a fire that has completely, entirely run out of fuel. It is cold ash.
Okay, let's explore that thermodynamic metaphor. A fire requires fuel to burn, to generate energy, to create heat and light. If a society is a fire, what is the fuel?
The fuel is human capital. It is natural resources. It is trust between citizens. It is innovation, physical labor, and what the text called earlier, amali isali constructive action.
So an exploitative Zalima society, a society that hoards wealth and power at the very top, is essentially a bonfire that is rapidly and unsustainably burning through its own foundational fuel.
Just to create a bright, dazzling light for a tiny fraction of people.
And the elites live in the brilliant glow of this massive expenditure of systemic energy. They think the fire will last forever.
But the laws of thermodynamics are absolute. You cannot generate energy from nothing. If a system continuously burns fuel, if it continuously extracts labor and resources from the bottom of the pyramid without ever replenishing it.
Without investing in the health, education, and stability of its people.
Right, then entropy increases. The system reaches a state of thermal death. You can't just keep throwing your citizens into the furnace to keep the VR game running.
Eventually, the society simply burns itself out. It exhausts all its systemic energy, the flame dies of its own accord, and all that is left is dead and kamidin, a civilization reduced to cold ash and dead stubble.
Not because an angry god cursed them,
but because they ran out of thermodynamic fuel.
And the text immediately, in the very next breath, contrasts this dead, burnt-out anomaly of a society with the macro state of the rest of the universe. In verses 19 and 20, it describes everything else in the cosmos, the planets, the stars, the fundamental forces, the subatomic particles, as constantly functioning. The word it uses is eusebion.
Eusebion. Swimming or gliding in perfect sustained motion.
It implies a state of dynamic, perpetual equilibrium. The rest of the cosmos operates tirelessly. It doesn't break down. It doesn't experience thermal death in the way these societies do because it runs on strict balance. It runs on exact reciprocal exchanges of energy.
Nature runs on balance. If a star burns fuel, it is locked in a delicate balance with gravity. But human societies that try to run on massive imbalance, where one class extracts everything and gives back nothing, are essentially a thermodynamic glitch.
They are an anomaly in a universe defined by eusebion.
And the universe actively rejects and purges that glitch to restore equilibrium. The dead stubble has to be cleared away by the physics of the cosmos so a new balanced system can take its place.
Which forces us to ask the ultimate question of human behavior. If the universe is so clearly wired to reject and mathematically purge these imbalanced exploitative systems, why do humans keep building them?
Right. Why, century after century, from ancient empires to modern financial bubbles, do we keep making the exact same structural miscalculation?
It's the defining question of history. If the math always wins, why do we constantly try to fight the math? The source material actually gives us a specific, deeply analytical political science answer to this, and it revolves around a single, highly contested concept.
Sovereignty.
Sovereignty. It's the foundational root cause of every Zalima structure ever built.
To understand this, the text's notes reference a definition from a political science perspective, very much in line with thinkers like Jacques Maritain in his work Man and the State. It defines sovereignty in a very stark, unambiguous way, the power to do all things without accountability.
Let's pull that apart. Power to do all things without accountability. To act, to legislate, to extract, to wage war, to dominate, without ever having to answer to any higher law, any balancing force, or any structural audit.
And the tragic flaw of human history is that human beings, particularly political elites, dictators, monarchs, and even modern monolithic corporations, constantly try to claim this absolute sovereignty for themselves.
They want the power to rule without answering to anyone or anything above them.
They want to be the unaudited masters of their domain, writing the laws of reality to suit their desires.
But if we look at the broader philosophical context of this lecture, specifically looking forward to verse 23 in this exact same surah, the text drops a massive intellectual hammer on that human ambition. It states clearly regarding the ultimate law of the universe. He is not questioned about what he does, but they will be questioned.
Let's decode that terminology. He represents the foundational, unyielding laws of the universe, Allah in the Quranic terminology, the ultimate hack. And they represent human beings, societies, and institutions.
The logic is undeniable. True sovereignty, the absolute inherent power to dictate the rules of the physical and social system, belongs only to the fundamental laws of the universe. Gravity is not questioned.
Thermodynamics does not submit to a quarterly review.
Exactly. The law of requital is not audited, it is the auditor.
So no human, no state, no emperor, and no economic theory can ever hold absolute sovereignty. Because humans are always, inescapably, operating inside the physical system. We are subjects of the math.
So when human beings try to claim absolute power, when a ruling class acts as if they have no accountability and can extract from their environment and their people without limits, they are claiming a status that fundamentally violates the physics of the universe.
And by claiming that false sovereignty, they automatically initiate their own destruction. Because if you believe you have no accountability, you will inevitably hoard power. You will inevitably hoard resources, starving the base of your society to enrich the peak.
You initiate the termite rot.
You build the brittle roof beam. You create the Zalima structure.
You construct the structural fluff, the buy. And because true sovereignty belongs only to the objective laws of the universe, that universe is mathematically guaranteed to eventually launch a kinetic strike of hack to smash your illusion. The audit is unavoidable.
It is a devastatingly rational critique of human hubris.
Oh.
I mean, it strips away all the romanticism of empire building. It removes the mystique of dictators and untouchable billionaires, reducing all of it to a simple thermodynamic error that will inevitably correct itself over time.
It completely reframes reality. We are not living in a playground where we can invent whatever rules we want, and we are not living in a mystical theater where we can just pray away the consequences of our systemic exploitation.
No, we live in a rigorous, active, hyper-vigilant environment that demands structural justice. It demands perfect equilibrium, and it has zero tolerance for those who try to rig the scale.
This changes everything about how you read these texts. It's not theology in the traditional sense, it's the ultimate social physics.
Absolutely.
Precisely. The universe is a unified system running on one singular, unyielding law. But, this inevitably leads us to the next great logical problem, which the source material tackles brilliantly.
Oh, the unity issue.
Exactly. What happens when humanity tries to split that universal authority? What happens when we invent multiple competing centers of ultimate power to justify our fractured, divided societies?
I am so ready for this.
In our next deep dive covering Lecture 3 out of 13, which focuses on Surah 21, verses 21 through 24, we will look at the ultimate rationalist takedown of political and theological polytheism. Because if the cosmos actually had more than one foundational law, if it had competing sovereigns, the math dictates it would have instantly collapsed. We will be breaking down the physics of unity next time.
That's going to be an incredible conversation. But before we get there, I want to leave you, the listener, with one last thing to ponder today. Step away from ancient history for a second and look at the physical and social structures around you right now.
Yeah, bring it into the present.
Look at your workplace. Look at your local economy. Look at the political systems you participate in, and even the digital social media feeds that consume your time. Are those systems built on dense, objective reality? Are they fueled by constructive action and a drive toward equilibrium? Are they hack? Or, if you look closely, are they just structural fluff, unproven assertions, and extractive bubbles? Are they belly, just waiting for the physics of the universe to demand an audit?
That's the real question.
The structural fractures might be invisible from the outside, but the termites never stop working. It's only a matter of time before the bean snaps.